In today's video, we're counting down 5 of the most disturbing animal attacks in Florida history. From a teen who jumped into a flooded canal with a python, to a father who waded through shark-infested waters with his kids watching. But first, we begin with a retired Florida man whose shortcut across a golf course cost him his life. It was May 7, 2016, the Florida sun casting long shadows across the Valencia Greens golf course as Glenn Perro made his final walk. The 72-year-old widower from upstate New York had moved to the villages 9 months earlier, seeking the peace and sunshine that had eluded him after his wife's passing. What he found instead was his own tragic end in the murky waters of a retention pond. Glenn was known throughout his neighborhood as a friendly but stubborn man who had little patience for what he called Florida rules. His evening walks had become routine, shortcuts through the golf course rather than the designated cart paths, dismissive waves at maintenance staff who warned him about wildlife, and a general disdain for the yellow caution tape and warning signs that sprout like weeds after every rainstorm. That evening, recent rainfall had caused the retention pond near the 8th hole to overflow, creating the perfect conditions for an alligator to venture beyond its usual territory. The standing water mixed with runoff containing fish waste and organic matter would have attracted the predator's attention. It was a recipe for something to go horribly wrong. Spring in Florida marks the beginning of alligator mating season, when males become increasingly territorial and aggressive, expanding their range in search of mates and new hunting grounds. Adult males can reach lengths of 14 feet and weigh over 1,000 pounds. Their bite force measures an astounding 2,980 pounds per square inch, enough to crush a turtle shell or snap a human femur like a twig. Glenn stepped over the barrier chain and yellow caution tape at 7:15 p.m., picked up by security footage around the area. His shoes splashed through the ankle-deep floodwater as he took the shortcut, completely unaware that he was being watched. A greenskeeper loading tools onto his maintenance cart spotted Glenn across the flooded area. He was about to call out a warning when something near the grass line caught his attention. A shape that had been perfectly still, now drifting slightly with the current. The 10-foot male alligator had been lying in wait, using a hunting strategy perfected over millennia. The attack came without warning. The massive reptile launched from the brush with explosive force, its powerful tail propelling it through the water faster than Glenn could react. The alligator's jaws clamped onto Glenn's right leg with devastating precision. The initial bite crushed bone instantly, the sound audible to the greenskeeper from 50 yards away. What followed was the alligator's signature killing technique, the death roll. The spinning maneuver used to disorient prey and tear away chunks of flesh is one of nature's most efficient killing methods. Glenn was yanked off his feet and dragged into the deeper section of the pond. His evening walk transformed into a nightmare in seconds. The greenskeeper shouted and ran toward the water's edge, but the distance and his own safety concerns prevented any rescue attempt, so he phoned for help. He said he saw Glenn surfaced once, his arms thrashing, before the alligator's powerful jaws pulled him under for the final time. The entire struggle lasted less than 15 seconds. Emergency responders arrived within minutes of the 911 call, but the pond had already returned to its calm. Dive teams worked through the night, their underwater lights cutting through the murky water as they searched for Glenn's remains. Recovery divers located Glenn's body the following morning, wedged against a concrete drainage inlet where the current had carried him. The injuries were catastrophic. The alligator's initial bite had shattered his femur and caused massive blood loss, but the official cause of death was drowning. The predator responsible was captured hours later using baited hooks. Following standard protocol for alligators involved in human fatalities, it was euthanized by wildlife officers. The investigation revealed that Glenn had walked past multiple warning signs, stepped over barrier chains, and ignored verbal warnings from maintenance staff. The retention pond had been clearly marked as a wildlife zone, with signs posted in both English and Spanish warning of alligator danger. Some residents called for stricter penalties for ignoring closures, while others argued that extensive restrictions infringed on their freedom. But for those who knew Glenn personally, it was simply a tragic end to a familiar pattern. A stubborn man who believed rules were suggestions, until one proved fatal. He ignored the signs and paid the price. And just a year later, in the murky shallows of Mosquito Lagoon, a barefoot fisherman waded straight into the path of a hunting bull shark. It was June 30th, 2018. Morning came when Rory Delgado stepped barefoot into the still water of Mosquito Lagoon. The sky was overcast and the light was flat, making it hard to see what was underneath the water's surface. To Rory, this was ideal. No tourists, no boats, just the sound of fish splashing as they scattered below. He didn't realize they weren't moving away because of him. Rory was a 39-year-old competitive angler from New Smyrna Beach, Florida, known throughout local fishing circles for his aggressive wading techniques and stubborn refusal to fish from boats. His philosophy was simple. Fishing was about being in it, not above it. While other anglers use shallow draft skiffs or kayaks to navigate the treacherous waters, Rory preferred to wade, often covering distances that made even experienced guides uncomfortable. His social media account is filled with photos of trophy redfish caught in impossibly shallow water, always with Rory standing waist-deep in the lagoon. That morning, Rory had made a decision that would prove fatal. Despite slicing his big toe on a sharp oyster shell the previous day, he chose once again to fish barefoot. The wound became a dinner bell for any predator within miles. In this specific environment, even a few drops of blood can be detected by bull sharks from extraordinary distances. They're highly developed olfactory systems capable of sensing 1 part blood in 10 billion parts water. They're among the most dangerous sharks in the world, responsible for more unprovoked attacks on humans than any species except great whites and tiger sharks. Unlike their oceanic cousins, bull sharks possess a unique ability to regulate salt in their bodies, allowing them to venture far into freshwater systems and shallow estuaries. They can grow up to 11 feet long and weigh over 500 pounds, with a bite force exceeding 1,300 pounds per square inch. Most critically, bull sharks are opportunistic hunters with poor eyesight, relying on vibration, electrical impulses, and scent to locate prey in murky water. As Rory waded confidently toward a distant school of tailing redfish, he began working his favorite lures, loud surface poppers designed to mimic injured baitfish. The aggressive splashing and commotion were intended to provoke reaction strikes from redfish, but the disturbance attracted something far more dangerous. Bull sharks frequent these shallow estuaries during summer months, following massive schools of mullet and croaker that provide easy feeding opportunities. The combination of Rory's bleeding wound and the surface disturbance created the perfect storm of predatory triggers. A fellow angler positioned 300 yards away on the shoreline watched through binoculars as Rory worked methodically through the flat, his casts creating expanding rings on the still surface. The witness later told investigators that everything seemed normal until a sudden violent eruption of water appeared behind the unsuspecting fisherman. The bull shark, estimated at 6 feet in length and weighing approximately 200 pounds, had been stalking Rory for several minutes, drawn by the scent trail from his wounded toe and the vibrations from his surface lures. The attack came from behind and slightly to the side, a classic hunting pattern that prevents prey from detecting the approaching predator. The shark's initial strike was catastrophic. Its powerful jaws clamped down on Rory's lower left leg just above the ankle, the serrated teeth designed to grip and tear rather than slice cleanly. The bite severed Rory's posterior tibial artery, causing massive blood loss that would prove fatal within minutes. Rory's scream echoed across the lagoon, a sound nearby kayakers later described as unlike anything they'd ever heard. He tried to turn and fight, but the shark's grip and his injuries caused him to collapse in the shallow water. One kayaker paddled toward the scene after hearing the scream while signaling other people on the shore to call for help. By the time he arrived, Rory was face down and unresponsive, his fishing rod floating nearby with the lure still attached. Paramedics reached him minutes later, but it was too late. Rory had died from blood loss and shock. The autopsy confirmed the catastrophic bite to his lower left leg showed deep tearing and crushed bone consistent with a bull shark strike. There were no defensive injuries, indicating he likely lost consciousness within seconds. Rory was laid to rest in a small private ceremony in Titusville. The turnout was quiet but heartfelt, mostly locals who knew the risks but respected the man who had taken them. Many fellow anglers admitted they had long worried about his habit of wading alone in dangerous waters, often ignoring basic safety protocols that could have prevented the tragedy. Warning signs were temporarily posted along the Mosquito Lagoon shoreline. They issued a public advisory urging anglers to avoid wading alone, especially with open wounds or during peak feeding times. The incident was officially classified as a provoked attack due to the presence of active surface lures and bleeding in known shark territory. But if wading barefoot into shark-infested waters seemed reckless to you, imagine a 15-year-old jumping into a canal in Florida where a python lay in wait. It was August 3, 2015, late afternoon, when Marcus Leventhal made his final jump into the flooded drainage canal in western Florida. The 15-year-old high school sophomore had been seen earlier that day by a neighbor running shirtless along the concrete embankment behind an abandoned housing development. He laughed loudly and jumped into the murky, debris-filled water. It would be the last time anyone saw Marcus alive. Marcus was known throughout his neighborhood for his reckless curiosity and insatiable appetite for danger. His friends and family noted a pattern of increasingly risky behavior, trespassing in storm drains, exploring abandoned buildings, and handling venomous snakes with casual confidence. He had been raised with little supervision. His father worked long shifts as a tow truck operator, and his mother had moved out years earlier. With no clear boundaries and few consequences, Marcus learned to see rules as suggestions and danger as a challenge, not a warning. The summer of 2015 hit South Florida hard. Hurricane Debbie caused widespread flooding that overwhelmed several illegal exotic animal breeders near Weston, allowing dozens of non-native species to escape. Among them were Burmese pythons bred for the pet trade. Wildlife officials have been tracking the predators for months, but the region's canals and drainage systems made containment nearly impossible. Burmese pythons are among the world's largest snakes, with specimens regularly exceeding 20 feet in length and weighing over 200 pounds. These massive constrictors possess incredible strength. Their muscular coils can exert pressure of up to 90 pounds per square inch, enough to stop blood flow and cause cardiac arrest in prey within minutes. The drainage canal where Marcus chose to swim that day had been transformed by recent rains into a perfect hunting ground for displaced predators. The water was high, murky, and filled with organic debris that provided ideal camouflage for ambush hunters. Palm fronds, construction materials, and storm runoff had created a maze of hiding spots where a large python could remain completely concealed while waiting for prey to venture within striking distance. Marcus had arrived at the canal alone that afternoon, ignoring frantic texts from friends who had planned to join him but were prevented by family obligations. His phone, wallet, and discarded shirt were later found wedged under a drainage grate, suggesting he had prepared for an extended swimming session in the contaminated water. Witnesses reported seeing him dive repeatedly, apparently searching for something beneath the surface, behavior that would have created the perfect opportunity for a python lying in wait among the submerged debris. Investigators believe the attack occurred in the knee-deep reeds near the canal's edge, where Marcus may have been diving or wading when the python struck. The snake likely mistook the splashing teenager for natural prey, wild pigs, deer, or large birds that frequently visit water sources in South Florida. The strike would have been sudden and violent. Pythons bite first to anchor their grip, then coil with explosive force, crushing the chest and cutting off blood flow within seconds. As Marcus struggled, every exhale allowed the coils to tighten further, collapsing his lungs and halting circulation. Death usually comes in under a minute, not from the bite, but from the sheer mechanical pressure of being slowly crushed alive. There were no signs of a fight, no defensive wounds, no screams. The ambush likely left him stunned and helpless as the snake finished its work. In the thick brown water surrounded by reeds and garbage, the scene was hidden from view. By the time anyone might have passed by, there was nothing left to hear or see. Just silence, and the slow drag of something heavy slipping below the surface. When Marcus failed to return home, his parents alerted authorities and search teams began combing the canal. But the murky, debris-filled water made recovery efforts nearly impossible. 2 days later, licensed python trapper Jorge Rivas spotted a bloated 13-foot Burmese python downstream, coiled beneath a leaning tree and showing signs of a recent large meal. He euthanized the snake and, during dissection, discovered the partially digested remains of Marcus, still identifiable by a skate park wristband. Forensics confirmed he had been swallowed whole, likely within hours of the attack, with dental records and personal items proving final confirmation. Marcus's death prompted immediate action from local authorities, who issued renewed warnings about post-storm wildlife hazards, particularly in neighborhoods adjacent to canal systems. A temporary fencing program was implemented near known drainage routes, and wildlife officials intensified their efforts to locate and remove escaped exotic species from suburban areas. Marcus was buried 3 days later in a quiet service attended by classmates, teachers, and extended family. His casket was closed and grief counselors were brought into his school the following week to help students process the sudden, violent loss. While one teen's reckless swim ended in a python's coils, 2 years earlier in Cape Coral, a retired teacher's daily feedings turned fatal when the gator she'd nurtured mistook her foot for food. It was March 15, 2013, when the tranquil silence of Cape Coral's canal system was shattered by a scream that would haunt neighbors for years to come. Across the water, a resident heard a sharp, panicked cry cut through the air from Joyce Weller's dock, a sound that ended as abruptly as it began, leaving only ripples on the water and a growing sense that something had gone very wrong. Joyce was a 66-year-old retired schoolteacher who had moved to Cape Coral 3 years earlier, seeking the peaceful retirement that had eluded her during 4 decades in Florida's overcrowded classrooms. Her modest canal-side home offered everything she had dreamed of: spectacular sunrises, elegant egrets perched on her seawall, and the slow, meditative pace she had earned after years of managing unruly students. A lifelong bachelor who preferred solitude to social obligations, Joyce had found her sanctuary in the waterfront living. Joyce's fatal mistake began innocently enough. The previous summer, she had noticed a small alligator, perhaps 4 feet long, occasionally cruising through her canal. She began tossing kitchen scraps into the water from what she considered a safe distance. She named the young gator Benny, and delighted in telling neighbors how he seemed to recognize her morning routine, appearing at her dock like clockwork for his daily meal. However, Joyce failed to understand the predator living just beyond her seawall. American alligators can grow over 14 feet long, crush bone with nearly 3,000 pounds of bite force, and adapt their behavior through repeated human contact. When fed, they lose their fear and begin to associate people with food, turning from wary animals into bold, dangerous threats. Over the months that followed, Benny grew, both in size and boldness. What Joyce interpreted as friendly recognition was actually dangerous conditioning. Each feeding session taught the alligator that humans meant food, gradually eroding the natural wariness that keeps wild alligators at a safe distance from people. By spring 2013, Benny had transformed from a cautious 4-foot juvenile into an 8-foot predator that had learned to associate Joyce's presence with feeding time. The morning of March 15th began like countless others. Joyce emerged from her house carrying a plastic bowl filled with leftover chicken and vegetables. Her usual offering for the gator she had come to consider a pet. She settled at the edge of her dock, legs dangling over the water as she'd done dozens of times before, completely unaware that she was about to become prey rather than provider. What Joyce couldn't see was that months of conditioning had fundamentally altered Benny's behavior. The alligator no longer approached her dock with the cautious curiosity of a wild animal. Instead, he had learned to position himself directly beneath the feeding spot, waiting with the patient focus of an apex predator. His 8-foot frame, now weighing close to 400 pounds, possessed the explosive power to launch his entire body out of the water in a feeding strike. The attack came from directly below with devastating precision. Witnesses from across the canal described a violent eruption of water as Benny launched himself upward, his massive jaws clamping onto Joyce's dangling foot with bone-crushing force. The impact was so powerful that it lifted her partially off the dock before dragging her into the canal in one fluid motion. She had no time to scream again, no opportunity to fight back against a predator that outweighed her by hundreds of pounds. Desperate scratch marks gouged into the weathered wood of the dock told the story of Joyce's final moments, her fingernails clawing frantically for purchase as the alligator's death roll began. The rotational force generated by an adult alligator's death roll can exceed 1,000 pounds, easily breaking bones and causing fatal internal injuries. When emergency responders arrived at the scene, immediately called by her neighbor that saw the attack, they found only Joyce's empty sandal floating near the dock, an overturned plastic bowl that had contained her final offering to Benny, and the telltale drag marks that revealed the tragedy's violent conclusion. Search teams located Joyce's body hours later, pinned against a concrete weir nearly half a mile downstream. The autopsy revealed drowning as the primary cause of death, though the traumatic injuries to her leg indicated she had likely lost consciousness from blood loss and shock before succumbing to the water. Wildlife officials captured Benny that evening using baited treble hooks and chicken, the same food Joyce had used to condition him for months. Following standard protocol for alligators involved in human fatalities, Benny was euthanized. The incident triggered a brief but intense local campaign for stricter canal patrols and enhanced warning signage about alligator feeding. Florida law had long prohibited feeding alligators, with penalties including fines up to $500 and potential jail time. But enforcement remained inconsistent in residential areas. Joyce Weller was buried 4 days later at Coral Ridge Cemetery in a closed casket service. Fewer than 30 people attended, mostly neighbors and relatives, with no formal eulogy given. Just as one woman's mourning kindness toward her backyard alligator became her undoing, far away in Mosquito Lagoon, a father's shortcut through shallow waters would leave his young son screaming as a bull shark transformed their peaceful kayaking trip into pure horror. It was July 2, 2016, when Daniel Kirkham stepped off his kayak and into the calm-looking waters of Mosquito Lagoon. The sun was high and the falling tide exposed oyster beds, prime hunting conditions for coastal predators. What started as a routine family outing took a sharp turn, as Daniel's 2 sons watched helplessly while the water around their father suddenly erupted. Daniel Kirkham was a 43-year-old father from Gainesville, known among friends and family for his quiet confidence and deep love of Florida's wild waterways. Most weekends found him exploring remote estuaries and unmarked creeks with his 2 young sons, ages 8 and 11, teaching them to appreciate the natural world he had grown to love over decades of outdoor adventures. Daniel preferred the solitude of forgotten channels to crowded boat ramps, seeking out the brackish backwaters where only the splash of paddles disturbed the peaceful marsh. However, Daniel may not have fully understood that bull sharks, among the world's most dangerous predators, were uniquely adapted to hunt in the exact shallow conditions he had chosen for his family outing. Unlike their oceanic cousins, bull sharks possess the remarkable ability to regulate salt in their bodies, allowing them to venture far into freshwater systems and shallow estuaries where other sharks cannot survive. They can grow up to 11 feet long and weigh over 500 pounds, with a bite force exceeding 1,300 pounds per square inch, enough to sever a human limb in a single strike. That morning, Daniel had launched from a public ramp where a printed warning about increased shark activity had been posted on the bulletin board. The notice, issued by Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, specifically cautioned against entering the water in areas where bait fish activity was high. Daniel glanced at the warning but dismissed it as routine, believing it was just another generic advisory issued more for legal coverage than actual danger, especially in a place he had fished for years without incident. As the tide continued to drop, Daniel found himself forced to exit his kayak to prevent it from grounding on the muddy bottom. The water was thigh-deep and murky, stirred up by his movement and the kayak's passage through the narrow channel. Behind them, schools of small baitfish darted nervously through the shallows, a clear indication that larger predators were active in the area. The nervous behavior of prey fish is one of nature's most reliable warning systems, but Daniel was focused on navigating the challenging passage rather than reading the subtle signs around him. The disturbance created by Daniel's movement through the shallow channel would have been detectable from hundreds of yards away, drawing any nearby predators like a beacon. The murky water that made navigation difficult for Daniel provided perfect camouflage for a shark approaching from below. According to his kids, the attack came out of nowhere as Daniel guided his kayak around a narrow bend in the channel. His younger son would later describe the moment to investigators as looking like the water exploded. A bull shark, estimated at 5 to 6 feet in length and weighing approximately 200 pounds, surged from a deeper cut in the channel and clamped its powerful jaws around Daniel's lower torso. The shark's attack followed the classic pattern of bull shark predation: a single powerful bite followed by immediate release and retreat. Unlike great whites, which often hold on to their prey, bull sharks typically strike and withdraw, allowing their victim to bleed out while they assess the situation from a safe distance. Daniel collapsed backward into the water, his anguish cry echoing across the marsh as blood began to spread rapidly through the murky water. His sons, still secure in their kayak, began screaming in terror as they watched their father struggle against injuries that were already proving fatal. Despite the shock and pain, Daniel's paternal instincts remained intact. He urged his boys to stay in the kayak and use the emergency whistle attached to the deck to call for help. The older boy, trying to stay calm, paddled toward the main inlet in search of help. His younger brother pressed a shirt to the wound, his hands quickly soaked in blood. A nearby fishing guide responded within minutes, but Daniel had already lost consciousness. Despite attempts at first aid and emergency medical service arriving within minutes, he was pronounced dead before he could be airlifted to a trauma center. Daniel was laid to rest 5 days later in a modest cemetery outside Gainesville. The service was private, attended by close family, a handful of fellow outdoorsmen, and several local officials who had assisted in the recovery effort. In the aftermath, the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission increased patrols around Mosquito Lagoon and began posting larger, more prominent warnings at public access points. The agency emphasized the importance of heeding advisories, especially during peak baitfish activity in shallow waters. Thanks for watching. If today's brutal stories entertained you, the next video dives into even more gruesome incidents. See you soon!